what to expect from your running injury rehabilitation. Now, before you skip to the next episode, I realize that that does sound like quite a boring title, but I promise you, you are going to want to hear this. If you are someone who has struggled with running injuries year on year for a long time, or you have the same injury coming up all the time, or you feel like you're running less and less as the years pass because you're having more trouble with injuries, these kinds of things are really important for addressing this concept of expectation. So although it is a little bit theoretical, it's really, really important. So bear with me, it's going to be worth it. Now, to try and make the case for why you should care about this, let me share a little story. So maybe 10 years ago or so, I was back home living with mom and dad for a bit because of, circumstances. And I was back home for 3 or 4 weeks. I can't remember exactly why. But me and dad started playing tennis again. So we played tennis 2 or 3 times a week for a couple of hours. And after a week or two, he said he couldn't come one day because his wrist was hurting. And I said, oh, okay. But, he said he didn't want to make it worse. He didn't want to damage it. And, because I'm a physio, I talked to him about it and said, it's just that your wrist isn't used to it. And yeah, give it today off. But next time you play, just don't play as long, but keep playing. And as long as you don't do too much too soon, your wrist will gradually get used to that stress again. It'll adapt. It'll become more resilient. And then you'll be able to play as much as we're playing now without pain or even more. And so that's what he did. And then over the next couple of weeks, he sort of took it a little bit easier. Then he built back up, and then he was playing 2-3 times a week with me again. And he said, my wrist is fine. I'm quite surprised because I'm playing more than I was before, and now it hurts. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said, I was worried because I thought it meant that I was kind of too old for tennis and that I was damaging it. And what he realized is that it was just the way he was approaching his training was a bit too much too soon. He wasn't that he was incapable of it. He just needed to do it a little bit differently. And the reason that stuck with me, I think, is, I've had millions of these encounters over the years as a physical therapist, but I think, with it being my dad, that one really resonated with me because had he not asked me that, had he just kind of tried to rest it better, he would have stopped playing tennis. And later he got into pickleball. So now he plays pickleball like 3-4 times a week. And that's, you can imagine his quality of life is much better doing that than it would be if he didn't play any racket sports anymore. And so that is quite a small shift in perspective or expectations for what he should expect from his body. And it had quite a profound impact over a long period of time. And that's, I think, quite an example of the power of having accurate expectations. So when you have an injury, if you have accurate expectations, the chances of you getting what you want in the long term are much higher. And what I see among runners is a lot of them don't get back to the level of running that they want to when they have trouble with injuries. And it's not because they're doing the wrong things. It's not because they need certain shoes. It's not because they need special injections or shockwave or any of this stuff. It's simply that their expectations are inaccurate. They are not aligned with the way it is actually going to go. And that has a very, very, very detrimental effect on their prognosis, which is how it will pan out in the end. So let's take an example of a runner. So let's say this runner has Achilles pain and they develop this Achilles pain while they've been trying to train for ultra trail 50-mile races. That's what they want to do. But they've had Achilles pain for the last month. And they are struggling to run more than 3 or 4 miles before the pain stops them. And in order to do like 50-mile races, they were kind of expecting that they'd need to hit training volumes of running sort of 50-60 miles a week. So that's the gap. They can run sort of 5 to 10 miles a week at the minute. What they need to be able to do is 50 to 60 miles without pain. And that's the discrepancy between where they are and where they want to be. So if they don't bridge that gap, they don't reach their goals, I would say they failed rehab because they didn't get all the way back to the things that they want to do. Now, let's say that this runner goes to physical therapy and they have an inaccurate expectation of how their rehabilitation, about how their recovery is going to go. And they think, well, I've had Achilles pain for the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's probably inflamed. It needs to calm down. I need to rest it for a bit. But then within a few weeks, maybe a month, I'll be back up and running again and I can get back to training. However, that is not an accurate expectation. That's an inaccurate expectation that's going to set them up for disappointment. An accurate expectation would be, I have Achilles tendinopathy. I've had it for quite a while. It crossed a symptomatic threshold recently, so I can feel it now, but it's been coming on for a while. And it is going to take 3 to 6 months of slow progress and 6 to 12 months of, completely resolving this issue, even though I've only had it for a month. You can see the difference here. So the runner is expecting that within a month, a few weeks or a month, they're going to be back to full training. Whereas the reality is the accurate expectation would be, it's going to be 3 to 6 months to get back to full training and then 6 to 12 months to kind of fully resolve the issue and be back to full training. And so because of this inaccurate expectation, that when they go to physical therapy, which they're doing like 2 times a week for 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, even though they actually are doing the right stuff, they're not much better. In fact, they can only run a little bit more than before. But that's because the strength adaptations in their muscles, the resilience adaptation in their tendon, those 2 things in particular, those things take, 4, 8, 12 weeks to really start to see any noticeable change physiologically. That's why they don't see any change in their symptoms or abilities yet. So they think it's not working, but they actually are laying the foundation. It will work, but they need to keep progressing it and they need to keep doing it longer. But the problem is because they expect to be better than that by 6 weeks, they think quite reasonably it's not working. So then they start looking at other options. So then they start looking at injections. They look at different shoes. They start Googling exercises. They start doing a little compilation of exercises on Instagram that they save in a folder and then they do them all every morning. And they start messing with it and doing all these different things. Whereas actually what they were doing was correct. They just needed to continue progressing it. But they didn't think it was working. So they start doing this other stuff. And the worst one, which I see all the time, is, oh, it must be too inflamed. I'm doing too much. I need to take a month off, which is like the worst thing they could have done. And then they get into this cycle where they rest it for a month. When they try and run on it again, it's even weaker, it's more irritable, and they get into that pain, rest, weakness cycle that we've talked about on the show before. So because of this mismatch of expectations, they don't continue doing the rehabilitation that they were doing that would have progressed them all the way back to running, although it would have taken 3 to 6 months. But they instead try and change things up, find some other way of doing it because they think it's not working, even though it was. And then 6 months later, they're no better or they're worse. Now they can only run a mile or 2 because they keep taking time off running and letting it get weaker. And that's what stops them getting to their goal. And we see this all the time in the physio world. We see runners who have expectations that it will go quicker than it actually will, and they are often reasonable, but they need to be changed because if they're not, when it's not going quick enough or it's not going as quick as they expect, they think it's not working, they stop doing it, and then they try other stuff that doesn't work, and then they don't ever get back to the amount of running that they want to do. And then the problem with that is the following year, instead of doing 50-mile, 60-mile training weeks, this guy's doing 5 or 10-mile training weeks, which is no fun, right? But it's not what he wants to do. So the following year, when he's now had Achilles tendinopathy for a year and a half, which is something I've seen many, many, many times before, he quits because he's like, this sucks. I want to do 50-mile races. And after a year and a half, I can run less than I could last year, right? So this is a story I've heard many times before. So the solution here is not a fancy treatment. It's not shockwave, it's not injections, it's not new shoes, it's not changing your technique, it's not walking backwards on a treadmill, which seems to be the answer for everything these days according to Instagram. It's that the problem here was that expectations were not accurate. And the solution to that problem is accurate expectations. So when I'll go through some takeaways for your own rehabilitation. And what I do when we work with people in our first onboarding call, when we're setting up the first couple of weeks of training to see what we're going to get them doing, is we talk about a 3-month goal or a 6-month goal or a 12-month goal. And I ask them, what do you think you'd like to be able to do 3 months from now that you can't do now that you'd be extremely happy with? And we set that as our goal, provided they suggest something reasonable. If they suggest something that I think is unreasonable or unrealistic, that's my opportunity to correct it so that they have accurate expectations. Because usually when that happens and someone thinks they're going to go a little bit faster than they do, when I correct them, they're like, oh, okay, that sucks. But at least now I know what to expect. And sometimes runners will suggest a goal that's more conservative than it needs to be. And I think, no, I think we can do more than that. So maybe if we can get to XYZ instead of this. Does that sound good? Right? So there's a way of aligning our expectations together so that both of us are on the same page in terms of how we expect this to go. Now, the takeaways for you, if you're listening to this, if you've had trouble with your Achilles or your knee or your shin or your plantar fascia or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's always the same. For any running injury, it's good to think months, not weeks, generally speaking. Definitely for tendons and bones. If you have a tendon injury or a bone injury, so like a bone stress injury or definitely a stress fracture, you want to be thinking about your recovery and rehab in months, not weeks. A little bit less so if you have things like IT band pain or patellofemoral pain. Sometimes you can get those resolved in a few weeks. But then the other thing is like severity. So if you look at, if you've had the problem a long time, then it's going to take longer to resolve. If you've had the problem be more disabling, meaning you can do less, it's going to take longer. So like what I mean by that is if you can not run at all, that's more disabling a problem than if you can, you can run, but you can't do your long run, right? If you can't run at all and it hurts when you go up and down stairs, that's a more disabling problem. So it's going to take even longer to get better. If you have pain when you're in bed, then that's really disabling. That's going to take a very long time to get better, right? That's how the severity of the problem influences the prognosis, which is like, how long do we expect this to take? And I can't give you an exact formula, but if the takeaway is think months, not weeks, most of the time. And then what we want to do is look at trends rather than the day-to-day. So we want to be seeing progress mostly each week and each month, but we are going to have ups and downs. So you're going to have bad days, you're going to have bad weeks. You shouldn't have a bad whole month, but you might. But we are going to see these dips. So I always tell my runners, don't get too excited when it's going really well and you have a long run that doesn't hurt at all, but don't get too upset when it's going badly. Look at the trend, and what we should see over time as the weeks and months pass is you trending where you can run more with less pain, but don't look at any specific day because that's going to get you either too excited or too upset. And keeping runners on track through these ups and downs is, I think, one of the most valuable, contributions that we make. Because like I said at the start of the episode, it's not particularly like sexy or interesting to align expectations and keep people on track and remind people of their expectations and remind people not to get too upset when it's going badly and remind them not to get too excited when it's going well, to make sure that expectations are accurate and realistic so that you keep doing the things. So you keep doing the strength training to build the muscles. So you keep doing the progressive running training to build the resilience. So you keep doing the technique work to optimize the biomechanics. In order to keep doing that stuff, you have to believe that it's going to work. And if you have inaccurate expectations, then you're not going to believe it's going to work. Then you're not going to do this stuff. Then it won't work. So that's one of the most valuable contributions having a coach can do for you, or a physical therapist who knows how to do this stuff. So if you don't have that, or if you feel like you're spinning your wheels and not getting anywhere and you want some help, having a team of experts who've done this 100 times before can be really, really helpful in helping make sure you get back to full running. So as always, we'll put a link in the description if you want to talk to us, book a call, and we'll see if we can help you get back to whatever level of running would represent a full recovery for you.